Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Forgotten Footy Stories. My name is Cameron, and for the first episode, I will be talking about University Football Club, one of football's oldest and by far the most forgotten club to ever be professional, even if that time was not for very long. The story of University Football Club starts in 1859, the year the club was founded. It was founded 6 years prior to the opening of its ownership school, Melbourne University, who opened its doors to students for the first time in 1853. They wore a black guernsey with a big V through the middle, which is very similar to the Victoria kit of today, except the V was blue. They played mostly second-tier football until their admission into the professional VFL in 1908. They were in the background and not mentioned in many senior competitions until 1905. In 1906, they lost only one game against Hawthorn. After years of rebuild, after being in the second-tier competitions for so long, they were admitted in 1908 into the VFL alongside then second division team Richmond. They now also had a second side that competed in lower competitions, also under the name University. The rules of the game that they played had come a long way since they were back in the top league, which was a few seasons from 1885 through to 1888. Any hopes for University to do well in their professional debut were quickly obliterated in the minds of supporters as they lost to the previous season's wooden spooners Essendon by 66 points in their first ever game in the VFL. They beat fellow newcomers to the league Richmond the next week, and then they beat St Kilda in round 3, who had played finals the previous season. At this point, they had won 2 and lost 1, and people were starting to pay very close attention to University. But unfortunately for the varsity boys, this was just the opposite of signs to come. They spent the first 3 seasons competing well in the 10-team competition, finishing 6th place, 7th place, and 6th place respectively over their first 3 seasons. At the end of the 1910 season, they had legal disputes with Essendon about playing at the East Melbourne Cricket Ground, who they had been leasing from, the owners who were Essendon. So where was the next logical place to move for Melbourne University? You guessed it, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. The following year, in 1911, with a new stadium and newer ambitions, they took a bullet that they would never recover from. The heads of the VFL voted in a 16-4 majority of professionalism being introduced completely, with player payments being introduced. Why was this such a big deal for University? Good question. In order to play for University, you needed a matriculation degree. In simple terms, if you were not a student or a teacher at Melbourne Uni, you were not to play in this team. This already limited University extremely as to how good the players they had could be, how many they could have. This made it a whole lot worse for them when professionalism was introduced, as they would have to start paying players who were really just students at their own school, and they would have to pay teachers on top of what they were already paying them as teacher salaries. After 1911, for their last 4 seasons in 1911, 12, 13 and 14, they came dead set last, coming 10th in every single one of their last 4 seasons. At this stage, it was impossible for University to win any games, losing their last 51 matches straight. Their overall record from the 6 seasons of 1908 to 1914 in the professional VFL read 27 wins, 2 draws, 97 losses. World War I started at the end of University's stint in the VFL, killing nearly 70 players over the VFL, 20 of such being from the varsity boys. Even if they had intended to stay in the VFL, it would have been nearly impossible, especially with so many players taken fighting for their country. 20 players from one squad is a lot of players. That is more than what is on the field today. Their exit from the league at the end of 1914 was met with mixed emotions. A vast majority of the fans could unfortunately see this coming, as University couldn't keep up with the pace of the game, nor did they have the strength to. A South Melbourne fan was famously quoted for saying, "University, they are the kind of people who brush their teeth and wear pyjamas." University's short time in the VFL did not go without some star players rising through the ranks. The biggest standout from University's VFL days was Roy Park. He kicked over 100 goals. He also scored heaps of goals after his university days, also playing for Footscray, who were in the second division at the time, and the Melbourne Demons, who the majority of University's leftover players happened to go once they left the VFL. There was also a fine man named Albert Hartkoff, who was also a fine cricketer. As well as kicking 87 goals for University, he played over 40 first-class cricket matches and even played a game in England for Australia, being cap number 120 for cricket lovers. University FC still exists today, with two teams that play in the amateurs, the Blacks and the Blues. They still wear the same blue and black strip and are strongly followed, the biggest alumni of which being AFL CEO Gillon McLachlan. There was a couple of wacky stories from their time. The first of which came in the 1875 season, where they had a half-season merge with St Kilda. It didn't go well for either of them. St Kilda at the time were currently in the top division of football, but they were at the bottom and they were slumping down very badly due to go down to the second division, where University were going okay currently at the time. St Kilda thought that if they combined themselves with the better team from Division 2, that they could do much better in Division 1, which was what they were in at the moment. Up until 9 years before this 1875 season, in 1866, games had been decided in football by the first team to score 2 goals wins, as it was such a mudslide every week. Since then, in 1875, it had changed to the highest amount of goals, however, and this didn't make it look good for the merged team. Oddly enough, their merged team name was called St Kilda cum University. They played 9 games together, half a season. They did not win any games that season while they were merged. Their record for that season read 1 goal for, 21 against. University got into the top league for a few years from 1885 to 1888, 10 years later. However, they won 5 out of their 70 games and therefore were promoted back down to the second division yet again. This was becoming an occurrence for University as they finally went into a rebuilding stage and, as you know, came back a bit better and stronger in 1908 and joined the VFL. Another funny story is from a match against the Melbourne Demons in 1863. The students, who you would take to be particularly smart individuals, got their math wrong as they were found to have too many players on the field. The Melbourne Demons captain called a head count and they were found guilty. University only managed 2 draws in their VFL time over 6 years, one of which came against Collingwood in round 16 of 1909. They had 16 qualified doctors playing on the field that day for University against the Pies. Talk about saving money on a trainer. I found that stat really wacky. If you were to try and put University's days into a brief statement or a few words, you would say that they were just an amateur team playing in a professional competition. And we all know that's never going to end well. The proven fact is that University clearly did not have the funds that other clubs had, the training facilities that other teams had, or the amount of players to pick from, so they did not have as many skilled players like other clubs did. In the end, there was only one way it was going to end for them, sadly. That just about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks for listening to the first episode of Forgotten Footy Stories. It was really fun researching this, and I hope you've had an awesome time listening to it. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.